The US is primarily concerned with China because that's what their own assessment says, that China is the closest competitor on AI for them. Uh, and as a result, I think, again, going back to the techno-nationalism piece and then the Make America Great Again, America First philosophies, I think the competition with China, at least on AI, will intensify.
Welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. Hi, I am Surya Gangadharan. The Economic Times earlier this week carried a story. This was sometime on Monday in the edit page. It says, Order American Takeaway. It's an article on the shape of technology, AI innovation under the Trump presidency, the possible shape it could take. And the article says Trump will shape not just AI policy, but also the future path of the global tech competition, open innovation ecosystem, and AI military applications. The article was by Anirudh Suri, a non-resident scholar at Carnegie India, and he's on our other end of our StreamYard connection, Anirudh Suri. Welcome, Anirudh. Glad to have you.
Thank you for having me, Surya.
And very interesting piece here that I was reading. Anirudh, you have flagged the implication for India in four areas: greater techno nationalism, restricted access, intensifying competition, and the acceleration of militarization. So let's take these one by one. Let's begin with techno nationalism under Trump. What shape is it going to take? How is it going to form?
Yeah, no, thanks, Surya. So I think on the greater techno-nationalism piece, right, I think anyone who has followed Trump's foreign policy priorities, even in his previous administration, understands that for him, as the slogan goes, "Make America Great Again." I think one of the key messages he's given to his constituency is that he's going to focus on America first, and I think that will apply to the technology world as well. I think that one of the key frameworks for the US over the last 4 to 6 to 8 years, almost now, on the tech side, has been within the framework of the US China tech competition, which we'll come to. But I think the US also realizes that to retain their economic edge in the world, which ultimately underlies their military and geopolitical edge and leadership, they've got to win at tech. And within that, I think the framework that is being adopted and likely to be adopted is that of America first, right? And to that extent, I think innovation, as opposed to regulation, is going to become a key priority for this administration. By which I mean, Trump, even during the campaign, has already said very clearly that he will repeal the executive order on AI, which was a massive document that came out last year under the Biden administration, that laid out a lot of guardrails around development of AI, etc., testing of models, and so on and so forth. And Trump has said he will repeal that, obviously with the stated intent being that he wants to prioritize innovation, he wants to prioritize cutting edge innovation and not hold back. Right. So I think that's going to be a key piece. I think analysts who are covering Trump and his supporters who are shaping tech policy are not clear whether the AI and national security memo that was released just a couple of months ago by the Biden administration that looked at how AI can be used in the military and national security spheres, whether that will get repealed or not. But the executive order is most likely going to get repealed. Innovation, as I mentioned, will get prioritized, unhindered innovation possibly, or less hindered innovation, which obviously has then implications for a country like India as well. My general view is, Surya, here that India will have to emphasize innovation as well. I think the debate on innovation versus regulation has been going on in India also to some extent over the last year or two vis-a-vis AI. And I think the Indian government has largely held back on putting forth any substantial regulation of AI, though they've put in a few rules here and there. But But my assessment is that I think, as far as the US India partnership goes, I think India would be better off also emphasizing innovation, at least for some time, before it starts to emphasize regulation. Um, that said, which will of course entail 3 or 4 steps, which I'm happy to get into, including spending more on AI R&D,
Yeah.
collaborations between US AI labs and AI firms with their counterparts in India. I think more partnerships between companies of the likes of Jio and Nvidia, for example, have forged, but really across the AI supply chain, Indian firms should try and form partnerships with their US and European and other counterparts. But that said, one of the key things I also mentioned in the article, Surya, that is not to say that India should give up its um, policy push on the global stage as far as AI safety, AI accountability, AI trust is concerned, right?
Hmm.
But I think that really would be better done at the global stage right now through AI summits. Like India is currently, I think, still the president of the GPAI, the Global Partnership on AI. Various countries over the last few years, South Korea, United Kingdom, and now France in early 2025 are going to hold these AI summits. I think these are platforms, global platforms, where India must continue its push for greater accountability to be instilled into AI platforms, greater trust, greater safety, because ultimately that's good in the long run.
Tell me, where do we stand on AI worldwide?
See, there's a few different angles you can take on that, Surya. One is, of course, on the competition angle. The other is, of course, on the tech development itself. Like, where is AI from a tech development standpoint? The third is obviously from tech regulation, tech safety standpoint. Which of the three are you asking?
No, I'm just looking at the technology as such, you know. Are
Yeah.
we way behind as we are in so many other areas? Are we somewhere up there, respectable?
As India, I think on the tech competition, tech development side, I think that I have a paper coming out on this soon as well. I think there's a couple of aspects on which we are doing well, but there's at least 2 or 3 or 4 aspects that we are lagging, right? So if you look back, 2018 was the first time India Niti Aayog came out with a paper on general paper, like a strategy paper, um, in 2018 on AI, what we should be doing. From there to today, I would say the strategy has evolved significantly, right? I would say between 2018 and 2022, less so. But since 2022, there has been a lot of, I would say, action. On the AI infrastructure front, you've seen a big emphasis, obviously, on semiconductors, on getting AI chips, procuring AI chips, the national AI mission, which was approved last year by the cabinet, about
Yeah.
10,000 odd crores. Um, the public-private framework for acquiring AI chips for AI startups, AI research institutions in India, etc. That's had some progress. I think partnerships between firms like Nvidia and Jio, etc., have also, I think, taken shape. So there we've seen progress on the AI infrastructure front to some extent. I would say that as far as AI adoption is concerned, Indian firms, Indian businesses, Indian startups are very actively looking at it. I can't honestly say that whether they've made massive progress there or not, but I think they are starting to play around with AI in their core business operations. Startups are trying to do some India specific innovation on the AI front using models developed in the US. But I think really where we are lagging, Surya, I would say the dimension on which we are lagging, I think one is cutting edge research. And I wrote a piece a few weeks on this, that I think cutting edge research and nurturing and retaining cutting edge research talent in AI is something that India really needs to emphasize, because AI is not like the internet in some ways. AI is a lot more cutting edge research driven, right? The internet phase was really where even a few years after Uber had come out or Amazon had come out, you could replicate that and build Flipkarts and Olas, right? But I think in the AI world, you've really got to be at the cutting edge to make any difference. Otherwise, you end up being very dependent on the models and the work being done in the US and elsewhere. And so, really, I think cutting edge research and cutting edge talent in AI research is something that India really needs to figure out its strategy for. I'm happy to talk more in detail about that, but I think that's a key missing piece in our strategy right now. Um, and I think if we can plug that, then I think we'll also see a lot more startups coming out in AI that are innovative because they need that kind of research, that kind of data
Mhm.
modeling being done by these researchers to then build that innovation or startup layer on top.
So let's get back to Mr. Trump's plans. You mentioned restricted access as your other point. I mean, you've had techno nationalism to be followed by restricted access. It means the open channels are now going to start shutting down. You expect that to happen?
See, in line with the techno nationalism, there has been a big debate, and if you track the different Trump supporters in Silicon Valley, you'll find that
Mm.
there are at least two camps that are there. One that is saying that we must treat AI almost like the atomic bomb Manhattan Project, that we must closely guard the research and development that is being done in our AI labs, in our AI firms, and by which I mean US AI labs and US AI firms, and not give at least China easy access to it.
Yeah.
China being
Mm.
the primary geopolitical competitor. But as I mentioned in the article, that could very easily extend to even Europe and India, even
Yeah.
though we are obviously tech partners with the US. But I
Yeah.
think in its quest for tech leadership and for techno nationalism, as I was mentioning, this camp, if it prevails, could lead to a much. I don't think they'll close off access completely because I think that's not necessarily in the economic interest either. But I think it
Mm.
could be more restricted access. It could be access that you don't get access to the latest research, to the
Mm.
latest models, right?
Which anyway
Um,
nobody does.
which generally no one does. But if you look at Silicon Valley right now, Surya, closely, what's happening is in the competition between the big tech firms, again, there are two camps that have emerged. The open AIs
Mhm.
of the world, which are not giving access to the best research that easily, actually, and
Yeah.
Google and others. But then Meta, for example, in its quest to compete with its other big tech peers, has said, I'm going to take a very open source strategy as my strategy. And hopefully that
Mhm.
allows me to get greater market share in India and Europe and other places. You would have seen just a month or two ago, Jan LeCun was here
Yeah.
and Meta did this massive summit. Nandan Nilekani was also at this Meta AI summit in Bangalore, and really everyone was championing, the Meta's Llama models. And so there is this, I think, competition between the big tech firms on that front also, where
Mhm.
at least some set of them are saying, let's use this as a strategy to maybe reduce the lead that OpenAI had presumably run off with. So yes, openness is actually almost a strategy also for firms out of the US. For some of them, I think, and if the open source camp wins in the US or prevails in the under the Trump
Mm.
administration, then I think that will likely benefit countries like India more because ultimately our entire startup ecosystem is building on top of open source models
Yeah.
out of the US. The greater access we have, the more open access we have, the better it is for us.
Mm. Intensifying competition. Would you say that today the competition is really between the US and China?
Of course, I think the main game is between the two of them,
Mm.
right? To take a tennis equivalent, it's really Rafa and Nadal, or Rafa and Federer, or Nadal and Federer. Are the US and China. The main competition has been between them. That said, as we see in any game, other players do emerge,
Yeah.
right? And Europe is trying its best. I think France, especially, India, of course, is trying, but even other countries like the UAE and others are trying to build some kind of niche in AI. But I think that the core competition, the core capabilities still lie with these two large countries,
Hmm.
right? In the AI world, because they have the big tech firms, because they have the AI research talent, because they have edge on data on these various dimensions. I think they do have an edge today, and the US is primarily concerned with China because that's what their own assessment says, that China is the closest competitor on AI for them.
Mm.
Uh, and as a result, I think, again, going back to the techno nationalism piece and then the Make America Great Again, America First philosophies, I think the competition with China, at least on AI, will intensify. I think it'll become. It's already been very strong, even under the Biden
Yeah.
administration, that this has been one of those bipartisan consensus issues, right? The competition with China, and I think that that's likely to continue. But I think the implication for countries like India is that we must understand that. I think, at least now, going back to the previous Trump administration and what we've learned from there, is that Trump
Mm.
has a transactional approach. Trump wants you to show, as the counterparty, what
What can
value
you
you
do?
bring. Correct. What do you bring to the table, right? He tells
Mm.
the EU NATO allies the same thing, right? And I think it won't be much different on the tech front, except I think two things are in India's favor there. I think one is that India does have a few core things to offer,
Yeah.
and second, India is geopolitically an important friend or partner in the competition with China, right, for the US. So
Mhm.
I think that both those things are valuable, and that's what India must highlight to showcase its own value in the AI ecosystem as this competition intensifies. And in terms of the value that we bring, I think the broad frame I think that India could adopt is that the global south, right, which is massive number of countries which are going to adopt AI now in the coming years and adopt AI tech and innovation coming out of the US and other places, um, must not be left open for China to just and Chinese tech firms
Moving. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
capture, right? And I think that that's where a US India partnership could be very important. Openness could be very important, where Indian firms could build a lot of the kind of frugal AI innovation, AI applications focused on core needs that are more prevalent in developing countries, right? And whether it's in healthcare, education, communication, so on and so forth, like we'd seen in the internet era. And that could really, that kind of partnership between the US and India and AI firms, AI startups, could bode well for the US China tech competition, and at the same time really benefit, I would say, the Indian AI ecosystem as well.
Anirudh, how did the Chinese get ahead? I mean, why didn't we? Why couldn't we have done the same?
I think that two or three things, Surya, and none of these will necessarily come as a surprise. I think one, that the Chinese now, for quite some time, I think we have come to this realization a bit late, that tech is and that's what my book, The Great Tech Game, really tried to highlight. I think tech is at the core of global economic, geopolitical, military, and societal competition today. And tech
Mm.
capabilities are core. We cannot be playing the great industrialization game, as I've called it,
Yeah.
when the game
Yeah.
has actually moved to the great tech game. I think the Americans have realized it a long time ago. That's why you find that they are always at the cutting edge of tech innovation,
Yeah.
right? In wave after wave of tech, right? Starting from semiconductors, chips, internet, hardware, telecommunications, the internet, and now AI. Um, I think that they realize the value of it, going back, I would say, to the atomic bomb, actually, at least, at the
Mm-hmm.
very least, right? Back in the day, which is why today the parallels between the atomic bomb and AI are being drawn also. I think the Chinese realized it at least a couple of decades ago, that at the core
Couple
of
of
US and
decades.
dominance of the world, tech is at the core. If you start reading documents coming out of China, even in the early 2000s, they were starting to say that. But I think by 2012 or so, under even the present Xi regime, there were a lot of long-term plans, the 2017 plan, etc., that said
Mhm.
AI and these emerging technologies, what we call as emerging technologies or advanced technologies today, they were already planning for that then and putting resources behind that, right?
Mhm.
Over billions of dollars back in 2015, 16, 17 were already being poured in by China into AI research, um, into
Mhm.
AI talent, right? So today, if you look at the Stanford HAI AI index, Chinese researchers, Chinese research institutions, Chinese universities are at the top, sometimes even exceeding
Mhm.
the US, right?
Mhm.
Their focus might have not been LLMs, which is where OpenAI and others really gained an edge a few years ago, but their focus had been on other aspects of AI. Everyone understands and knows that facial recognition algorithms, again AI driven, is something the
Yeah.
Chinese have way ahead on. Um, Biotech, various fields I could list out where they've invested a lot in research.
Yeah.
Uh, Going back at least a decade. So I think that's one of the core reasons why they've been ahead. And they have known, like the Americans have known, that at the core of their competition, the determinant of who will win will be tech capabilities.
Mm.
And I think that
So,
realization has been into India now also. But I think,
mm,
let's say a few years later, and of course, we've not
mm,
had, and we don't have currently the kind of resource allocation that the Chinese and the Americans have done. Of course, we're a smaller economy, so one can't expect that we'll do the same levels of investment. But I think that there's a
mm,
lot of investment to be done into our AI research, talent into AI research institutions, into AI labs here, and of course having a clear data strategy also. Because that's again, there's a big differentiation. The American firms have access to pretty much the entire data of the world, except
yeah.
for China data, right? Because they've built the platforms that own the data, or they've been able to scrape the web despite all these copyright suits that sometimes get filed against these firms. But they've done it already. They've done that data grab already. The Chinese have done their own share for the data that they've been sitting on. I think India is in a relatively odd position where Indian data has been part of the US tech ecosystem, and as a result, the
Mm,
US firms have already had access to the English language data, and the other language data that we have, it there's just isn't enough of it yet, right? So even that data piece, we really have to figure out if we're going to develop our own, I would say, niche in the AI ecosystem.
mm. So, just another word on the Chinese before I move on to this AI and militarization. The Chinese have really invested in studying the American, the way they think, the way they work, and then emulated that, isn't it? We haven't.
The Chinese really have. I think if you study it again, I'm not a very deep Chinese expert, but on the Chinese tech side, which is something I follow, even as a venture capitalist, have met a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs and tech firms back in the day when the two ecosystems were still collaborating. I would say the Indian and Chinese. They really have. I think if you go back, as I was mentioning historically, also I think when they have studied the rise of America and Europe, right? I think one of the key realizations for the Chinese has been that tech and innovation is at the core of their domination of the world. The
Mm,
European first, and then the US. And as a
mm,
result, they've really adopted this idea in their heads that if they are going to win, or if they're going to lead in this world, they've got to be their own tech powers. Um, and I think maybe in India, we've not had that kind of historical view, right?
yeah,
Even when we
yeah,
look at why the colonial powers dominated, or why the US dominated the last century in the world, I don't think that though few people now, of course, do speak about this a lot in India, but I don't think that it's um,
seep down.
as
Yeah,
as deeply steeped as I think it should be. Just a simple example. I think and which is something I highlight often, and in my book as well. I did that R&D is at the core of tech innovation.
yeah, yeah,
Stay ahead in that game. Um, it wasn't necessarily the case in some other technologies where just adopting them was easy, right? But I think if you want to stay ahead in today's version of the great tech game, R&D is core. And India, I think, as now many people have highlighted over the last couple of years, especially including myself, that our R&D spends are just too low. Our private sector
yeah,
doesn't spend. Our government spends to some extent, but our private sector just doesn't spend, whereas it should. We are happy in our private sector to basically be the service providers leveraging technology being
yeah,
built up. And that makes you enough money today, right? Being a telecom service provider today makes you enough money,
yeah,
but you're ultimately reliant on core technology being built elsewhere. So you're not making the kind of wealth that you could, and you're not doing the
yeah.
kind of cutting edge innovation that could help you leapfrog in the next wave, right? So ultimately, you just stay
Mhm,
sort of one step behind, and I think that's what's got to change ultimately.
mhm. Finally, the last issue you flagged, the acceleration of militarization. What are you saying here?
So I think this is a very interesting trend. Also, I think that everyone, I think, generally understands the military-industrial complex and the power of it within the U.S. Decision making. in military affairs and geopolitical affairs, right? The military industrial complex has been at least very active for the last 40, 50, 60 years in the US. And I think there's a big shift starting to happen in that. You're seeing this, what I call the new generation firms emerging in that military industrial complex in the US, which are basically these new gen tech firms within this military industrial complex, right? What some people have called the techno military industrial complex, etc. These are firms like Palantir, SpaceX,
Yeah, yeah,
Starlink, Anduril. These are firms that, Surya, if you look at even the battlefield in Ukraine, even in the Middle
yeah.
East,
Use of drones, amazing. Yeah,
are starting to play a very interesting role, right? And are starting to take a bigger chunk of that DoD budget,
yeah.
right? Not the majority by far yet, but are starting to increase, like much like any startup does vis-a-vis their larger incumbent counterparts. And interestingly, along with this, is this clear observation that I think many people have made who follow Silicon Valley and have followed the US trumpet campaign, is that many of these new gen tech entrepreneurs in the national security sphere were supporters of the Trump campaign. So it doesn't take much to put two and two together there
Yeah.
to say what I'm saying, that I think under the Trump administration 2.0, the role of these new gen tech firms will accelerate. Right? The markets are showing that, like the stocks, the shares of some of these firms have,
Yeah,
um,
skyrocketed. Yeah.
um, I think that that'll likely continue. That said, I think there's always we must understand that the military industrial complex, the traditional firms, behemoths, they're not going to give up so easily.
Yeah.
One, I think they're not going to give up so easily. Um, this is real money, right? I mean, massive budgets and, of course, massive influence, etc.
And you need
Second,
wars, to keep
sorry.
investing and keep spending. And you need wars to keep them going.
That's right. That's right. And of course, the competition between the new gen firms also. These are the entrepreneurs that are leading these firms. I think if you study them as well, much like Trump, Elon Musk, like these are strong personalities often, and so often there is very strong rivalry and strong clashes often between them. But those are dynamics that I think we'll see how they play out over the coming months and years. But I think the key trend is definitely that there will be greater militarization of AI. Uh, there will be greater importance of these firms, right? And on the battlefield. So I think the nature of battle will also change as a result of at least the cutting edge tech battle that you're seeing. And therefore, there'll be implications for India,
Yeah.
right? I think
Yeah.
from our own indigenous goals of indigenous defense capabilities, that the Atmanirbharta that of course we are currently trying to emphasize in India, there'll be implications for that. I think uh, we want to also be very mindful that we shouldn't, if we want to continue with that indigenous defense piece, we shouldn't take our dependence from one set of players and just move it to the other set of
Yeah.
players,
Yeah. Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
That doesn't serve your broader purpose then. I think at the same time, we must be mindful that I think, and this is a piece I really want to highlight, that hardware has been the key mainstay of military conflict.
Yeah.
I think software will increasingly play a bigger role.
Yeah.
And as a result, in our indigenous defense efforts, strategy, software, and AI driven software in particular, right, must become a bigger emphasis for us to develop that kind of situational awareness, domain awareness, multi domain awareness on the battlefield. I think will be very important, and AI driven software will play a big role. I think general geospatial awareness will be a very important piece of any battle going forward, as we've seen in Ukraine and elsewhere.
Do we
Will be
have the
very
quality minds to push that? The quality minds, the high tech minds.
Surya, hard for me to say, to be honest, right now. I think that space is a field that India does have, a long history and
Yeah.
a track record in. I think the space startups are also now definitely emerging as a interesting force within that space domain for India. So I would say then we have a new geospatial awareness policy and so on and so forth. I think the brains are to some extent, if you were to take that particular vertical, I think
Yeah.
up probably there. But again, I'm not one to comment there without having delved deeper into that space
Yeah.
personally. But so I don't want to comment in a very definitive way. But I think that it seems like that we do have strengths there and talent there and a track record there that could definitely provide the foundation for building some
Yeah.
amount of excellence and innovation in, I think.
Anirudh, very interesting talking to you. We are completely out of time, and great perspective you've given us. So the way ahead is hard, and I think far more than the government should be involved, because I'm not sure the government alone has all the ideas. Uh, Ideally, private industry should step in a far greater way than it is now.
No, that's right. I
Anirudh,
think
thank you
that
very much.
private
Yeah,
sector has to play a much bigger role. I would agree.
absolutely. Anirudh, thank you very much. Great talking to you. And let's keep this conversation going at a future time, perhaps when India has gone taken several steps forward. Thank you very
No, my
much.
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That's all we have for you on this edition of The Gist. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media. Thank you very much. Good day.